My name is Steve Westgarth, and this is The Engineering Leader. I'd like to let you into a secret. We all write bad code. If you disagree, you may as well switch off. I'm delighted to be joined on The Engineering Leader today by Adam Rush. Adam is the creator of Swiftly Rush, where he publishes tutorials and articles focused on helping engineers build for iOS. He is also the organiser of Swift Leads, a conference which launched last year focused on engineers working with Swift. Adam is iOS Technical Director for Stream, which powers chat messaging and activity feeds for billions of users globally across thousands of different apps. Adam, thanks so much for joining the Engineering Leader today. Before we start, could I just confirm that you also write bad code?
I wouldn't like to see some of my code probably 12 months ago. So yeah, I would agree with that statement.
Perfect. In that case, we can have you on the podcast. It's good if you agree with that. So there is so much ground I want to cover with you today. It's really kind of difficult to know where to start. I've known you for several years, and I guess you've come through a whole journey in that time. But I guess maybe the place to start today is maybe by talking about your tech stack. You've been developing for iOS for 10 years or so now? You must love the platform. What do you love?
Yeah, this is a really interesting conversation because I guess in the last sort of 6 months or so, I've kind of been really thinking about this quite a bit. I've never really spoken about it too much, but yeah, I mean, I've dedicated pretty much my entire career on the iOS platform, which is kind of scary because I'm also getting older, which means, that equates to some time. But yeah, I mean, I've been doing iOS development. It's coming up to 12 years, so it's quite some time. And it's all been dedicated to that platform. I remember doing some backend, some PHP, some small websites, but they were pretty minimal. Everything else has been purely on the Apple side. So yeah, I'm a huge fan. I was pretty much an Apple fanboy in the early days, but that's kind of fizzled somewhat now. But yeah, it's been quite a journey.
Yeah, no, it sounds it. And so were you developing before you built for iOS? You mentioned PHP there, so you'd built some websites and things. Had you used any other coding languages, or did you sort of dive in with your first experience of coding with, I guess, what was Objective-C back in the day?
Yeah, so it was mainly, if I remember rightly, quite a lot of PHP because WordPress was huge then. Everyone wanted a website. It was pretty much, okay, let's spin up a WordPress site. So there was a lot of PHP, but then, HTML, CSS, the kind of usual early tech that was around at that time. I also did a website using Flash, which was fun. But I was so young. I was pretty much kind of learning and playing around really when I look back. But yeah, it kind of the iOS side was purely by chance because my brother had an iPhone 3, and I was just so jealous at this device. But I was totally like, oh, I would never have one of those phones. It's horrible. But deep down, I was really jealous, and I was so lucky. My parents bought me the iPhone 3G, and that was it. I was just in absolute awe with this hardware, and I'm really curious. I have such a curious mind that I was curious to look at how apps appeared on this phone, and suddenly how are they built? And before you know it, I was actually building my own app. I mean, it was absolutely terrible, but this was the kind of moment for me where I was really interested in the hardware and the platform, and that kicked it off, right? I mean, I was just building more apps and learning more and more, and then before I know it, I managed to land a job where I was doing some testing, some managing of an app, and that was it. That kind of kicked it off for me.
And was that the point when you got that job, when you really pivoted from realizing that this was a bit of a hobby, something you enjoy playing with, to the point that actually this could actually be a serious career for me and something you actually wanted to pursue?
Exactly. It's exactly that. I kind of got this job, and yeah, I started fixing bugs. So instead of just finding the bugs in the apps, I just started fixing them. And at that point, I thought, yeah, actually, I really enjoy being in Xcode. I really enjoy programming. And yeah, that was it. I was like, I must pursue this. And I just kept on learning and growing. And yeah, it kind of went from there, really.
So from your experience, when you think about how you learned to code and how you worked out how to write good code, what was it that really showed you what good code was? Because we talk about engineers, and anybody can write code. People can write things which work, which they can hack together, which ultimately will do something. But whether that's a good app that's maintainable, that's scalable, that's performant, that does all of those things. At what point did you experience your first example of good code, and how did you come across that?
That's a really good question. I think I've always been keen to learn from others. I've always had that kind of open mind. I've never, even when I look back, I don't think I've ever been that person that kind of sits in the corner and just, taps the keyboard. I've always been really kind of sociable and open to new ideas and learning. But a lot of my career has been spent actually working with loads of companies, because I was a contractor here in the UK, and I was moving around all different companies for short periods of time. And that was really like key for me, because I was, suddenly I was working at Audi with some real like top talent there. And then I'd move across and I'd be working for Motion Monsters in London, like a real big gaming studio. And you just got the chance to work with loads of different people with all kinds of different ideas. And of course I worked with some, not so nice people and some real excellent people. So I was really lucky to kind of pick out the people and the behaviors and the style of code that they were writing, pick that up and learn from them. And I think that's what's really helped me sort of develop over the years. And then even in the sort of last, I would say 3 or 4 years, I've worked with some, real big companies like Emirates in Dubai. I mean, they had 6 iOS teams, so scalability was really important there for the engineering team. So again, I've just been really lucky to kind of work with some, good companies and being able to sort of learn from them as I've kind of progressed through my career.
It's interesting you talk about the importance of being able to talk to other engineers who are able to share their experience and share their practice. It's something that in my own company, as we build a brand new engineering team within GSK, we're talking a lot about what is the difference between a junior engineer and a senior engineer and a principal engineer, for example. And there's definitely something in that about as a senior engineer, how you're actively looking for opportunities to mentor others around you, and you're finding opportunities to really help others to develop in their career and to move beyond just writing code and starting to identify when code is really great code. What for you makes code great?
Yeah, I mean, you've pretty much hit exactly what I would firm up there. I mean, I'll give you a real good example. I've joined a lot of companies and I've seen how their tech stack and their code bases can, sort of evolve over the years and always become really stale, because, they're getting new talent joining all the time, and people have different ways of writing code and maintaining it. But the biggest thing that I've always noticed is there's hardly any documentation. There's very little knowledge being shared amongst the engineers. And this is the kind of thing that I really push now going forward in any engineering team is, are we sharing knowledge? Are we writing developer specs? Is this code base that we're writing today maintainable? Could we read it in 6 months, 1 year's time? So it's very, for me, it's very much more of that and less of the, how much code are we writing? Because, yeah, I mean, I've seen it. I've joined companies where they've kind of 4 or 5 years down the line and they're having to rewrite huge parts of the app or the code base, and we can prevent a lot of that, I think, by doing the upfront thinking, the scoping out of the work, the documentation, and pairing, getting engineers working together and sharing the knowledge on what we're building.
It's so somebody once said to me that when you're writing code, you should always write it as if the person who's maintaining it is an axe murderer who knows where you live. Because when you come and look back at that code in 6 months' time, you need to be able to understand, what that code was aimed at doing. It's not always about being clever in the code you write. You can write very elegant code that yes might be clever in what it does, but actually it's about that simplicity and that maintainability that you're talking about, and making sure that actually we can all look at that code in 6 months, a year's time, 18 months' time, and still be able to modify it and use it within the app and not have to start again from scratch, completely refactoring what we've done, which is so important.
Yeah, for sure. It's the smart code that you mentioned is, you will pay the price on that in the long run. I mean, don't get me wrong, there is times where there's some quite some logic around some parts of an app, or whether it's like data persistence or something like that. Of course, there is quite a lot of logic there. But even that, we can create the separation of that code and still make it readable. That's the key there. So, yeah, I totally agree. I think over my time, certainly on iOS, there was a huge kind of adoption to start building these apps, and then over the years it's kind of evolved. The languages, the tech stack, the tooling, it's all kind of evolved over time. And I think now we're in a time where people are kind of stepping back and thinking, well, actually this app we've got is not just for the next couple of years. This 200,000 lines app is actually our future. This is something we're going to have for 5, 10, 15 years.
And I mean, people are investing huge amounts of money. I mean, you think about how much it costs to employ a development team even if you just look at iOS. There's huge amounts of money being sunk into apps, and companies simply can't afford to write these things off after a couple of years. I mean, they, as you say, they're here for the long term, and I mean that links me into another point around adoption of new technologies and new features as they come about. You look at the Apple ecosystem, and we get new frameworks coming out every year. As you look at WWDC and kind of all the latest greatest things to include within the app. Swift UI is only a couple of years old, and already you're kind of talking about, well, some companies are happy to adopt that, some companies aren't quite ready to move there. They're thinking about, do we have to refactor large swathes of our user interface in order to move in that direction? So at what point do you think companies should adopt the latest technology? Is it something that, as soon as it's announced, we should be trying to scramble to get it into the app? Or what's a sensible period to wait? How quickly should we be taking advantage of those features?
I think it really depends on who you are and what company you are, because if we look at, so there's different things here, right? You've got the transition to, say, for example, of Swift. So as you know, we had Objective-C, and that was the language we used to build iOS apps. And then we had the announcement of Swift, and that was like a fundamental language change. This was Apple basically saying, we want to stop using Objective-C, right? It was very clear that Swift was going to be the predominant language to build apps. Now we're in a position where they've announced Swift UI, and my opinion is, okay, it's really cool. I was there when they announced it in 2019, and I was like, wow, this is super cool. But it's a way to build the UI for your apps. And for most companies, so for example, I've named a few companies that I've worked for, so let's just pull one of those examples. So we say Emirates. For them to rebuild that app or rewrite parts of that app just to adopt Swift UI would be very expensive. expensive and also probably quite risky because they have a huge customer base, like booking flights and maintaining flights. You know, there's a lot of risk there. So I think that's going to be really slow in terms of like that example. However, here at Stream, where I'm currently working, it's really valuable for us to adopt new technologies because we build SDKs for other apps. So we, you know, in a sense, we've got to be at the forefront of the technology because a lot of other companies are going, oh, we want live chat. You know, who's out there that can provide us with live chat? And they look at Stream. Oh, okay, they're not quite adopting Swift UI yet. You know, are they investing in the technology? You know, what's their thinking there? So for us, it's actually really good for us to kind of adopt the latest technology. One, as marketing and branding, it does very well, but also we've got to look and really analyze the tech market and think, right, what is the future? And we've made the judgment that Swift UI is definitely the future, but it's going to take a long time, a lot longer than Swift did, for sure, in my opinion, anyway.
And I think you're right. It's the balance of how mature the technology gets before you can adopt it. I mean, I remember when Swift came out, you know, when that was first announced, you know, I started, playing around with the language and wrote, a couple of apps or whatever. And then Swift 2 came out. And then Swift 3 literally broke everything. It broke the world. And you had a number of quite high profile apps at that point when Swift 3 came out that literally had to do major refactors because they kind of fixed everything in Swift that should have been fixed on day one, but it had taken a couple of years to get to that level of maturity. So it really is a kind of a bit of a balancing act, isn't it? You know, between your quick adoption and you're getting that into apps quickly. So as you say, you can lead the way as Stream or whoever you might be working for, because you might want to, versus that, you know, making sure that actually we aren't going to waste our investment in a couple of years' time. And it's a really difficult balancing act that I think is quite difficult to get right for a lot of companies.
Yeah. I think my advice at Stream was very much like, we've got to jump on this, and we have a really small engineering team in comparison to our UIKit SDK. But for us, it's very much like, we've got to jump on this, and we've actually got a Swift UI SDK that you can drop into your app and it'll give you live chat very, very quickly. But if I was at a normal company, if I was at, you know, a company, let's just say, that had an app that they distributed, my advice there would be, play with it, allow the team to run some POCs, you know, proof of concepts, maybe even some small, like almost like a hackathon, you know, like a gamified event amongst the team, maybe even doing some like Friday learning sessions, and then maybe incorporate some small features within the app, you know, whether it's like a loading spinner or even if it's a small view, because you can use Swift UI and UIKit very much hand in hand. You know, it's so easy to kind of drop in a Swift UI component inside your UIKit app. And that allows you to just get the team and everyone sort of familiar with the tech stack and still kind of, you know, adopting the latest technology. So you can talk about that and promote that. That would be my advice for now. It's just not quite there yet. And would I invest everything into that if I had an existing app? I don't think I would. Not just yet. You know, I'd start drip feeding that in for sure over sort of a period of time.
Cool. And it's interesting. I mean, we've talked a lot there about your native app development, and I guess, you know, you're like me, you know, very much you prefer the native route, and you're coming from Apple route to the Apple fanboy. I also, you know, have been an Apple fanboy for many years, and I'm still a self-confessed Apple fanboy now. It doesn't matter what Apple announce, I'm probably in the queue to buy it. But there's been a lot of talk in recent years about cross-platform apps. I mean, you kind of go back, you know, many years ago to, you know, in the early days when people talked of things like PhoneGap, and we kind of went through that sort of journey. And then you've got things like Xamarin have come along, and, you know, things like React Native and various other cross-platform frameworks that have kind of emerged. And you have this you know, perennial debate around, well, you know, if we build cross-platform, it's cheaper, it's faster, you know, or whatever that might be. But you know, you're a self-confessed iOS evangelist, so why would you say that native was better?
That's like a huge question. It's so yeah. I mean, I am clearly biased. I mean, I blog about this. I speak about this. You know, I've got the word iOS in my job title and have since like day dot. But actually, at Sky, so in my previous job at Sky, they were in limbo actually whether to adopt like a React Native or a fully native application. And you know, we spent months actually sort of researching, gathering real insight into how other companies were doing this, and actually I spent a lot of time sort of researching. And my conclusion, even then, was to adopt native, because, despite the research, because if we go specifically at say React Native, it's good. Don't get me wrong. Like, you know, the framework itself is actually really powerful, and we've got a whole React Native team here at Stream. We have an SDK for React Native. It is very good, and I'm not gonna like dispute that, but it's just not the same experience in my opinion. You know, in terms of the development, in terms of the tooling, in terms of deployment, and even once you've got an app written in React Native, you're still having to write the independent platform components so that it feels like a native app. So actually, do you save the time or the resource? I don't think you do. And it also costs you in bundle size, like the framework is quite heavy, and also performance wise, there's a cost there. So you've really got to kind of analyze and see if it's suitable. We've got some customers who it makes real sense to use something like React Native, because if your website is written in React, there is a lot of components that you can reuse. There's a lot of business logic you can reuse within the app, but you still need to write platform specific code. So if you're doing it because you've got a lot of business logic written in React and you want to share it amongst the mobile apps, then fine. I think that's a really good reason. But just be prepared. You're still going to need native expertise to, you know, really look at the Android, the iOS, and make sure it's working specifically on each platform. But yeah, I mean, at Sky, we spent 4 or 5 months. We put a whole case together, and we decided to go native, and we built the iOS and Android capability out. But yeah, for anyone who's looking at this and considering like choosing between either one, I'd say React is number one in terms of like, it's not really called cross-platform, to be honest. But yeah, it kind of is. But I would say it's like number one. Xamarin I've done in the past, caused me nothing but trouble. You know, I'd get crashes a lot. It might have improved over time. I'm not sure. This was some time ago. So yeah, I mean, if I was to say choose, I would definitely say consider React Native. But I mean, you know me, Steve, I'm a little bit biased on this.
Just a little bit. And it's interesting. We were having a similar conversation at GSK a couple of weeks ago. And we had a bunch of engineers. We were talking around, well, should we be considering cross-platform? Having dived straight into a recent app development and kind of said, well, obviously we're going native. And suddenly it became a conversation and became a question within the organization. Should we be looking at cross-platform? And one of our iOS engineers came out with a statement that I think really rang true with me, to say that as soon as you introduce a framework, you're introducing another layer for something to go wrong in. So suddenly is the bug that you've identified in the framework layer? Is it in the Android app? Is it in the iOS code? You've got an additional level of debugging to do. And as you say, you need to have those expertise available to make sure you're able to still go deep down on the native framework if you need to, in order to resolve some of those issues. Which doesn't necessarily drive the cost benefits that people kind of imagine it would do, just because you're able to consolidate and maybe accelerate by developing with one team. So I think you're spot on in saying it really does depend on the type of app you're building and what your use case is. Where do you think we stand from a user experience point of view? Do you think that we're moving to a world where your cross-platform apps or shared code-based apps, should give the same level of user experience as a native app, or do you still think that native is essential to get that really smooth your user experience?
I think that's got to be the key thing to sell native, is how smooth the experience is, and I think that's why you've only got to look at the data behind some of these big apps, and I've seen a lot of data. Native is worth so much more to the business because those users generate more revenue, and although it's really hard to prove this, the experience has got to contribute to that. I mean, if you use some of the apps now on the App Store, they're so fast, they're so responsive, they're so easy to use. That's got to be a driver to the revenue, that you see. So yeah, I mean, for me, that's the biggest selling point that I would say to companies is, native is just so fast, it's so responsive, and it's just so easy to use, from a user perspective. I mean, there is some bad apps out there. You've got to obviously build that into the design and the UX and the UI, of course. But yeah, I mean, if that's done right, it's just so fast. The platform is super fast.
Yeah, no, awesome. I think you're absolutely right in everything you're saying with that. It actually brings us really nicely to a conversation on application architecture, because a badly architected app, will always be a badly architected app. It doesn't matter what you do or what you kind of put into it. We'll still have challenges that might be performance related or whatever. But application architecture and the way that we kind of build out our apps at a code level, at the design level, but also in the wider organizational estate is becoming increasingly important, particularly as we scale up the numbers of users and we need apps that are really super responsive, really performant. And customer expectation is really kind of driving, right? They really want and expect apps to work flawlessly, first time, every time. So in 2019, for the first time when Apple announced Swift UI, it was actually the first time that Apple announced a preference for a design pattern within an app. And they've really kind of pushed iOS developers to using MVVM as a pattern when you're creating an application. I just wonder if you've got any perspective on why you think Apple chose now to make that statement. I noticed there was a great blog article that you put onto your blog a couple of weeks ago, which is talking exactly in this space.
Yeah. So I mean, this is what's it called? Almost like a name drop. not quite a name drop, but yeah. I mean, if you visit my website, then I've recently wrote about this. But yeah, I mean, I think it made complete sense for them, because if you look at most kind of design patterns across all the other tech stacks available, once you start going to like a real reactive technology in the way it's built, MVVM makes so much sense. Even if you're building an Android app using Compose, for example, like it makes so much sense to design it using MVVM. And to give you like a very brief explanation, so you've got model, view model. My mind went blank then for a second. And essentially what it means is you're extracting and decoupling the business raw data, so the model from the view. And the view model acts as what I would describe as like a question and answer. So essentially you've got a view which has a question, such as, what's my balance? What's my first name, my last name, so that you can display it to the end user. And instead of digging into the raw data, the model, the view model would do that for you. So the view model would expose a property or a function which is like customer balance, and that would do the calculation from the model rather than the view being coupled to that. And it just allows that kind of clear separation. It also allows greater test coverage, and there's huge advantages to kind of keeping the view away from that raw data. And I think for Apple, I think I don't know what would trigger them to kind of push for this, but I think because other tech stacks are doing it, and it just, I don't know, it just kind of just makes sense. I think they just thought, well, this is how we would recommend to build apps using Swift UI. But also during that time, they did a huge push on tutorials. Like, this is the first time ever I've seen Apple actually write tutorials, and they're really good. And so I think it made sense for them to say, hey, here's a new tech stack to build UI, Swift UI. Here's how we would build them. And that's really nice, actually, that Apple have started doing this, because we need to do more sharing in the community. This is something I'm really passionate about in terms of, getting new people into the industry and new talent into the industry by sharing the knowledge. And I think if that's coming directly from Apple, wow, this is this is awesome, because it means, people are going to be going to their website. Okay, I've got some hardware. How do I build an app? Okay, I use Swift UI. Oh, and here's a tutorial whilst I'm here and looking. So I think it's all kind of tied with that, to be honest.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think you're right. I mean, getting that sort of content coming out from Apple really is great. And maybe we haven't had that before. But I mean, maybe this is the opportunity where Apple are actually coming forward and saying, hey, this is best practice. We know we've got literally millions of apps out there now. And we know there are some great apps and there are some not so great apps. And for me, this is Apple coming forward and saying, look, we've got a great platform here. This is the best way to use it and the best way to get to get the most out of it for your particular use case. And you touched on your website there, Swiftly Rush, and it's interesting as you talk around sharing experience and sharing practice, and you're kind of publishing tutorials and all of those sorts of things. I mean, what's your aim and objective for that website? Because I mean, this is very much the space that you're occupying, right? It's about upskilling and raising best practice right across the iOS development industry.
Yeah, for sure. And I've been writing tutorials and books and videos and all kinds of stuff for probably about 5 years. And I realized this last year that I've spent most of my time writing this for other people. So I kind of went through a moment where I was like, actually, I want to do this myself. I want to learn about what it entails to actually build a website that's kind of out there and having people visiting. So there was a bit of learning curve there, which I've quite enjoyed. But it means I can set my own cadence, right? So I'm writing my own tutorials. They're going out weekly, whereas before I was doing them like every 2 months or something like that. So I can write much more regular. But it also allows me to kind of, if I've got something in my head, I like to write about it. I don't know what it is. It's just something I've always had. So like recently this week, I've been thinking about the escaping syntax on closures, and I'm like, this is awesome. I need to write about this. So I've got like a half written tutorial. So a lot of the time it's just my head and my thoughts, and I just scribe them down, hoping that, they'll be useful to some people. But a lot of my content is very much beginner stuff. So I want to, really help new people coming into the industry. I mean, there is some advanced stuff, but it's mainly a bit beginner-led stuff. So I want swiftlyrush.com to be just a website where new people can come pick up some tips, tricks, things they might not have seen before. I also explore some frameworks that people might have not even known were there, like, for example, Metric Kit. It's super powerful to really analyze your app when it's deployed on the App Store. And, many people don't even know it exists because it's just quiet there. And it's like, wow, this is a super powerful framework that Apple have built for us. Let me explore it and I'll talk to you about it. So it's just really nice to just sort of have my own platform where I can just throw out some blogs and some articles, and hopefully people, will learn from it. They might even get one thing from it. They might get loads of stuff from it, which would be awesome. So yeah, it's just really nice, and it's also learning for me. I also learn from it because often if there's a subject, I want to make sure I know everything about it. So, like this escaping syntax, people will be like, oh yeah, that's super simple. We know why we have that. But it's like, is there a bit more to it that people don't know? So I'll go dig and find out a bit more knowledge. So it's also good for me and other people.
And I think it's so important to have good quality content, independent content out there, in the industry, for people to learn from. I mean, I'll be really honest. So you mentioned MetricKit. I totally missed that during DubDub 2019. And, I religiously watch, most of the talks at DubDub every year to kind of find out what's hot and what's kind of going on. It totally passed me by. And I only came across it when I saw it on your website, when you published that article. So, it's so important that we're talking around things that people might have missed, or your opportunities that might be there. As we've touched on MetricKit, I mean, you've mentioned how great a platform it is. If people are kind of thinking about, well, what does MetricKit do that's different to what else is out there? Maybe what's the difference between MetricKit and Firebase Performance or some of the other analytics kits that are out there that kind of sound as if they're occupying a similar space? What's it doing for us?
Yeah, I mean, the difference, especially on that one, is that it's built by Apple. So, I mean, it's incorporated into the Xcode tooling, so you could open Organizer and see, what crash reports you're getting direct within Xcode, and it's super lightweight. I mean, it's written in Swift, so it's super lightweight to incorporate into your app. Whereas some of these frameworks, they're quite heavy in that regard. So it's because it's built by Apple. It's very much a no-brainer in my eyes to kind of look at this, because they're giving you everything that you could possibly need to monitor performance across your app, but also without the cost of the framework size and all the other costs that come with adopting a third-party library. But honestly, I kind of do it to just, like you've just said, make people aware that this exists. I don't expect people to kind of read my articles and go, right, I must adopt this. I kind of want people to be like, I didn't know about that. That's really interesting. Or, actually, I might pull some of that and use it in my sort of day-to-day practice. And I really like your point there about having independent articles out there. There is a few that are writing tutorials and content, for free, which is amazing. But they're all different, and they all give a different thought process, and it's written differently. And I love that. I can visit, say, for example, Antoine's website, Vanderlee, and I'll read some of his articles. And I'm like, I didn't know that. And there's no like competition. It's just really nice to read someone else's content, and hopefully they'll read mine. And it's just really nice to have lots of different content out there, so you can kind of get different opinions on a certain framework, or a different opinion on a piece of code, or whatever it might be,
And it's amazing, actually, when you think about the iOS community as a whole, because you're right, there is no competition. You've got all sorts of people out there that are publishing your fantastic content, and everybody kind of is just really happy to share and to kind of talk about it. And, it'll be great. I mean, obviously, we've hopefully come through COVID at this point, and as we start to go back to conferences and all of those things in the next 12 months or so, going back to pre-COVID times when people would come together, you regularly get authors of articles and different speakers. You're literally you're having coffee and having drinks with each other and kind of sharing that best practice. And I don't really think that really happens in a lot of other industries or a lot of other coding languages. I mean, I guess the JavaScript community is certainly done a lot more over the last few years. But it's something I've never really experienced in .NET, for example, or in some of the other major coding languages you might have heard about. So I think it's really unique to the space that we occupy in the iOS world, which is really cool.
Yeah, and I think this stems from like the real excitement that Apple did a really good job on in like the early days. That the whole marketing around certain products, and people would get really excited. I remember in the early days they announced copy and paste, and it was like, this has been around for years, but the crowd was, they went absolutely crazy at this concept of copy and paste.
I remember when that update came out for my iPhone, I was literally waiting for the update button to appear, and you were you're literally hovering over it to suddenly get copy and paste. There was such an amount of hype around it, and you're right. I mean, copy and paste was around in Windows 95. It was probably actually around in Windows 4.1. So it's been there for years, but Apple was still able to market it as if it was something which was brand new, just because they hadn't yet done it on their platform. Amazing. And I mean, I guess that, it brings us to the ecosystem, doesn't it? Because I mean, the Apple ecosystem has, evolved, and new things have been added, and there are thousands of new frameworks, coming up and being used, and developers are trying to incorporate all sorts of things into their app, and it leads to huge amounts of decisions that have got to be made, and it's almost as if there's too many decisions that developers can make. I mean, are we moving to a world where the ecosystem is becoming too populous? Are there too many choices available to engineers, do you think?
I think that could be a good thing, to be honest. I don't think it will do any harm. But I mean, look, I mean, Apple's always been a closed network, if you like, in terms of. But I stand by the reasons for that. I mean, if we look at in comparison to Android and how that's kind of constructed, it's some people like that, some people don't. I'm on the closed network, if you like, in terms of the security that brings on, either hardware or tooling or whatever it is. But yeah, I think, I don't know. I think some choices is good.
And I guess you're linking it back to what you were saying before about MetricKit, for example, on iOS. Speaking as somebody who's head of engineering in a large corporate organisation, we're obviously developing both iOS and Android apps. And if we look at something like MetricKit, that is very specific to iOS. And you're then looking for an equivalent framework or something to use on the Android side. And that sometimes means you've got to have two tools, two sets of things kind of running in order to do the same thing, whereas actually you could train people in just using one framework that could be used in both. Just wondering about your perspective on some of that.
Yeah, I mean, look, I'm similar to you. I've been in similar like situations and roles as well, and I totally get that. I'm kind of a realist in that sense. Like I totally understand, and some companies are invested heavily in some of these tooling as well, both financially and from a technology point of view. So I totally get it, and it's not going to work for everyone. I think again it kind of goes back to our point earlier about if you can look at it and read it, excellent. And if it works for you, then maybe try it out. But, it's not going to be for everyone. I totally get that, especially these big companies, because, as well as I do, they're a big ship, and it's very hard to sort of make those big specific decisions on one platform, when you've got to consider that the whole kind of ecosystem within that company. So I totally get it. It's just about kind of analyzing the situation you are in, what company you're in, and will it work? I mean, if you're like an indie developer, for example, you've just got an iOS app, that could be excellent. That's a real quick win to start getting some real data from your app in production. If you're a big company, with iOS, with Android, with the web desktop platform as well, yeah, I mean, that's going to be a harder sell, because you're going to have a specific tool framework for a specific platform. How could that work? So yeah, I totally get it.
And I mean, another great example of that is Xcode Cloud. Now, I remember back in the day, 4 or 5 years ago, you were driving around everywhere promoting Jenkins as the future of CI/CD, and you're kind of trying to get everybody to adopt Jenkins as a platform. We then see Xcode Cloud kind of coming along, and Apple kind of doing their own take on some of those things. Are you a convert? Do you think Xcode Cloud is the future, or are you still in the Jenkins world?
I think this again very much falls under who you are, like what's your setup. But do you know what? I think the CI situation is very different in the fact that it kind of is unique to the platform. I mean, even if you've got Xcode Cloud, or if you've got like a third party company powering the CI, or whether you're hosting Jenkins in-house, you're going to have platform specific scripts within that CI. Like if you're building the iOS app, it's not going to be the same scripts that's building your Android app, I can assure you. I mean, I've done so much of it. it's very different. So I don't think it would be too much of a bad decision to have, Xcode Cloud adopted, even if your Android or other counterparts are doing a different CI system. But again, it kind of falls into the territory of like, what's the setup? I mean, at Sky, like we had a Jenkins setup because the whole DevOps from the front end website across to the iOS, the Android, and everything else they had were heavily invested in Jenkins. So it made sense to have the mobile apps using Jenkins. So that would be a hard sell or a more difficult sell. But I think, looking more broadly, I wouldn't see too much of an issue having a platform specific CI tool because they're really quite specific anyway.
Yeah, no, true. And I mean, all of this is just your part of us all learning tools and kind of developing and you're finding out new great ways to do things, right? And trying out new frameworks and kind of seeing where we go. We've talked a little bit about Swiftly Rush, which is your website. We're obviously putting a lot of tutorials and things. But the other really exciting thing which is happening in your world, which is again all about sharing that good knowledge and practice, is Swift Leads. I still can't quite believe that you managed to launch a conference in the middle of a pandemic, which is a really impressive achievement. So congratulations for that. The first iteration happened last year. I mean, how was that?
It was very tiring. and it just shows how amazing conferences are, meeting people. Do you know, I had the idea for Swift Leads. It was probably about, we're probably talking 3 years ago now, given COVID's been going on for 2. And I just felt like there were conferences in the UK, but I think in the North, it sort of went quiet. And I don't know, I just had this little itch where I wanted to scratch and just see if I could get something like this off the ground. And basically I kind of parked it for a while and I was like, I don't think I've got the time and everything else. And then suddenly I got this surge of energy and I was like, I've got to do this. I've got to get it launched. And so we kind of got all the plans together and sort of started sort of doing some teasers online and people started really getting excited. And then COVID hit, which was a huge whirlwind. And, we as many people also affected, a lot worse than we were for sure. And we kind of postponed it, which was a real shame. And then, we got to the following year and it was like, can we get this off the ground? Can we launch a conference with 100+ people during probably one of the biggest crises we've ever seen in the world for a very long time? And, the UK was in a relatively good position at that point. We did everything we could in terms of, mask wearing and making sure we followed all the rules in that sense. And do you know what? I'm so glad I did it. I just felt a real sense of almost like unity within the community. People came on the day and you could just feel the energy that people had built up over so many months of being at home. And it was just incredible. Everything went to plan and we had some incredible speakers. The food was good. The venue was okay. We're changing the venue. There was a few teething issues with space and stuff. So we're kind of moving to another venue. But yeah, the response was incredible. People loved it. Some people got new jobs whilst going there, which was incredible. People are landing jobs. That's what it's about. And people were networking and speaking to one another. And I love that. It's the whole idea is non-profit. No one's making any money from it. It's going to be built by the community. Just get everyone together for a whole day and network and learn. And yeah, I must say it was a very special moment.
Kudos to you. I think you're getting that off the ground at the point you did is absolutely phenomenal. And it's great to see you're bringing it back this year, which is awesome. I noticed that recently you launched your call for speakers. So you're interested in people who maybe want to come along and talk at the event. If they want to do that, how do they go about submitting a proposal? What do they need to do?
Yeah, absolutely. And, I'm looking for also engineering leaders and people in either management roles, that would be keen to do a talk. But yeah, I mean, visit our website, swiftleads.co.uk, and we've got a link on there for call for papers. It's open for 2 months, so until the end of April. And yeah, like I would highly recommend anyone to apply. We've got accommodation expenses we can cover. Also, we can offer some training in terms of if it's your first time speaking. We want to get new people onto the stage and be able to do a talk. So yeah, I would just recommend anyone who's interested to attend a conference and speak, come and visit us, put your details into the online form and come forward, and we'd love to see some new faces onto the stage.
Definitely. And I mean, we've mentioned the engineering leadership, and I mean, I guess that's one of the reasons why I've launched the Engineering Leader, is about sharing some of that, your leadership great practice, and kind of how to really build and develop great engineering teams. And that for me is is what this podcast's all about. So I mean, you're an experienced engineering leader. You've worked in numerous organisations you've been talking about. How do you think you go about making sure your teams are successful? What do you do to really make sure that they raise the bar and become that world-class engineering team that everybody aspires for?
Yeah, so I guess for me, I've spent so much of my career basically just writing code, and I would say in the sort of last 4 years, 4 and a bit years, I really started focusing more on this. How can we streamline engineering teams? How can we make sure they've got everything they need to sort of do what they're really good at? So I did this at Sky, my last role. We scaled the iOS and Android team from 2 or 3 people to over 15 engineering people within the squads. For me, it's about defining some key ways of working. So in terms of just like the software lifecycle, right? How do we raise a PR? How do we do a code review? How do we, these are like fundamental things that we do within engineering teams, but it's very good to sort of define those as a team. So we get together, how do we perform a code review? Is it 1 person, 2 person? Do we approve with some comments? There's all these kind of little things that you need to sort of clarify as a team, and which you've kind of gone through that process, and everyone knows almost like the rule book, if you like, not necessarily one to enforce, but everyone knows how we all work together. Then you can really start focusing on the people and right, how can we support this person in their career? How can we elevate them? How can we level them up? Can we give them more like scope in their role in terms of like defining projects work and scoping that out and really kicking that off in terms of a project. So for me, it's like if I was to join a new engineering team, it's about defining the ways of working, getting them down in terms of documentation, so that we all know how we work, and then really start focusing on individuals, mentoring, coaching, sitting down, working out where they want to go in terms of their career. A lot of people want to just focus purely on coding, which is totally fine. Some people want to might go into people management kind of roles. So really start focusing on individuals and actually spending the time to, zone in onto them, listen to them, where do they want to go, what's their ambitions, and, help them, support them to be the next person. I spend more time doing that than I do cutting code. I do write code. Like I'm currently rewriting some APIs that we have in the Stream iOS SDK. I still enjoy, being at the code for sure. But most of my time now is being with the people and supporting them and making sure they've got everything they need to do their best at the job. And I think, just to kind of wrap up my point on that, I'm less about how much code we're writing and more about the bigger picture in terms of people. Like right now, we've got probably the biggest documentation the iOS team has ever had, ever, in the SDK team. And it's not because I just wanted us to write documentation, write docs. But they're developer specs, right? So we've got a developer spec for offline support, so that in 1 year's time, we can go back and see what decisions we made. Why did we make those decisions? So if we do have to refactor a piece of code, we can go back and look at their developer spec. But this is awesome because it means I can put certain people who are very close to becoming like senior engineers onto those tasks and say, right, let's sit down and scope out this piece of work. Let's write this developer spec. So not only are we getting a really good output, we're getting these documentation that we can refer back to. It's really valuable for the company to have like a history, like a change history. But it also means engineers get the time and the space to do stuff that they're not normally allowed to do, like scoping out bigger pieces of work and really scoping out, the architecture for that. So it's a win-win, right? We can elevate people. We can also get the output, the changelog, the HODs, the architecture, the designs, etc. So it's like a win-win. So I focus more on that side of engineering nowadays than I do actually cutting the code. But all of that together for me is like how I build engineering teams. And then it can scale, once you've got all this in place, once you've got your CI, your automation, you could just scale. I've just hired another 2 engineers that were onboarded to the SDK team. And we're now up to like 12 engineers. And you can just keep scaling. You can even split off into multiple teams because you've got all this set in place,
Yeah, I think there's so many points you've mentioned when talking about that. I think the whole thing around principles, patterns, and standards is incredibly important. But I think for me, the importance of actually pushing those decisions down into the team is really important. These are not diktats that organizations need to necessarily make to their teams. This is about saying, hey, you know what? The code you write, the quality of that code, that's your responsibility as a team. What are you going to do to make sure that code quality is great? And that naturally leads to a conversation around, well, let's talk about code review and let's talk about pair programming or swarms or your pull requests or whatever it might be. And I think by pushing those conversations into the team, I think that's a really healthy thing for the team as a whole. To really inform and bond and have those agreements between each other, so that they understand why they're made, and they're not just some management diktat around, well, this is the way we work around here. I don't know what you think of that.
Yeah, for sure. Like I totally agree. We have at Stream we have a weekly iOS tech discussion, and anyone can add something to the agenda, and we have a whole hour as the iOS team. They can talk about anything. It might be a certain piece of tech debt we need to refactor. It could be labels on GitHub and how we're marking issues because we're open source. It could be anything like that, and we just open the discussion. We get an agreement across the team, and then we put it into action. Once we've had that discussion, right, that's what we're going ahead with, and we move forward. So yeah, even for me, as much as I would love to just kind of run into the team and just say, oh, we need to do it like this, because I've seen this a million times. No, it's like, right, the team can make the decision on this. Of course, I'm in there, I'm helping steer and kind of guide the team into, where I would make the decision, from my experience. Like, of course, I'm there to help guide and support, but it's ultimately down to the team to sort of make those decisions and move forward.
Cool. And I mean, reversing the question a little bit, and thinking about, that's really good practice we've been talking about in the last couple of minutes. But organisations make a lot of mistakes, right? So you've worked for a lot of organisations. Maybe pick on one or two of the worst mistakes you've seen organisations make when they've been building engineering teams. What's your experience in that space?
Oh, this is a real tough question because I have seen a lot of mistakes. I think I've definitely had the experience of a company completely moving away from native to cross-platform. I've seen that happen, and I've also seen that exact example go wrong and then pivot back. I've seen that happen. And the other thing I see very regular is, big companies almost strangling themselves in how they move. I think, look, technology is moving at a rapid speed, especially in iOS, especially in Android and across the native platforms, but even across many technologies. And I guess my biggest thing that I see happen so many times is that companies get so big that they end up being unable to move. They become unable to make changes and improve the tech stack because it affects a certain product, or it might grumble some customers, right? But it happens, and it's a huge mistake because eventually the code, the platform, the tech becomes stale. Product becomes, not as great as it used to be because you're not improving the technology, and all because of the sheer size of the company. So that's probably the biggest mistake I've seen happen at so many big companies. And, it's such a shame because usually it starts off really, really great. And then eventually it grows so big that you end up having so many layers of decision making that it kind of ends up strangling the product, in the end. So I would say that's probably the biggest mistake I see.
Yeah, no, I can agree wholeheartedly with that. I mean, at the end of the day, nobody starts building a product with the intention to build a bad product. Everyone starts out with really great intentions. But actually, you're getting control of that as you scale, as you try to ramp up and do things faster. Sometimes you need to slow down in order to go faster. And that's really counterintuitive, but it's something that I also have seen in countless organizations where people are kind of running at a problem, and actually by virtue of running faster at that problem and investing more money and investing more people, it actually causes a huge issue in terms of what we're actually able to produce and how fast we're able to iterate and ultimately deliver value to customers, right? Because there's no point in value being on a pull request or on a branch in the code base somewhere. The only point that that functionality or code is delivering value is when it's on your end user's device and they're actually able to use that functionality in the app.
Yeah, exactly. And I would say, the biggest thing I would add to that is get the right people in the right position and get the right people with the right technical understanding. This is a huge mistake I see so many times. Let's not forget that a lot of the stuff we're building here is technical. And this is why I really love my position at Stream, because my job title is technical director, but it's the word technical. I've been coding for 10 plus years. I've been there, done it, seen it. And it allows me at a senior level to make decisions based on that experience. So I look at our SDK and I think, okay, this is where I see it going wrong. This is where we need to invest. This is not performant in this area. How can we change this? Do we need to invest in more people? Do we need to invest in tooling? Do we need to, I don't know, make some change to how we're building it? And it allows me to feed that back to board level. So I reported to the CTO into the company. So straight away, you've got a technical person allowed to steer the direction of either the product or the company with that experience in mind. And often you don't see this in companies. And what ends up happening is that technical advice and expertise gets lost. Once it leaves the team, it's lost. And that's a real shame. And that's where tech starts kind of being hard to maintain, because we're not investing in those areas and because there's not quite an understanding of that level. and that's why I love my role at Stream, is that I can do a bit of everything. I love the tech, I love coding, but I also like looking at, how are we investing in the people? Are we investing in the right areas? Do we need to onboard more engineers? Do we need to onboard less? Do we need to invest in some tooling or whatever it might be? And then looking at, can I jump on a call to help integrate a specific customer because I know this inside out? So it allows me to have this sort of flexibility where I could look at the business side and the product, but also use my kind of technical expertise to sort of steer those bigger decisions. So I think, back to my original point, that's also a real mistake. And you see this in companies all the time. It's like, don't lose the tech voice within the company.
Definitely. So crystal ball time. A lot of announcements get made every year, particularly in the iOS space. We're still a few months away before we get to WWDC. If you're gazing into your crystal ball, what do you think, or what would you like to think, we're going to see announced in the iOS space this year, and what's left for Apple to do?
So I think the software will just keep evolving. I think SwiftUI is going to be even better. I think they're going to keep iterating on the software side. I don't think there's going to be anything groundbreaking in terms of software. I think hardware. I think the next big thing we'll see from Apple is AR. I think it'll be some sort of wearable. I think they're finding the time when to release this. I think they've got something fairly big up their sleeve. I think they're just waiting for the market to be ready for it. So I think, like software, I think we'll just keep seeing more and more improvements there. I think hardware, I think there's probably going to be some glasses or something wearable on the face, but I think they're probably just biding their time. I'm not sure it's going to be this year. I think it's maybe in a few more years.
So don't talk about glasses. You are talking to one of the people that invested in Google Glass when that came out, and that was an investment that didn't pay off for me. But hey ho, I'm sure Apple will do their usual thing, and when they release something, they always come out with the best, right? And it's always the product that you need and want.
Exactly. Yeah. It'll be groundbreaking, off the scale, incredible glasses.
So Adam, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on the Engineering Leader today. Thank you so much for taking the time. It's been awesome chatting to you. I'm sure we'll get the chance to chat to you at some point again in the future. But thanks very much for coming on to the podcast. And good luck with Swift Leads, and also good luck with Swiftly Rush. Hope it's really successful.
Thank you, and thanks so much for you for having me. It's been awesome.
Adam was such a great guest to have on the podcast, and it was awesome to be able to chat with him about some of the great things happening in the iOS development arena. You've been listening to The Engineering Leader, a brand new weekly podcast where I talk to people who know how to build software really well. We'll be sharing best practice and insight from right across the tech industry, from people who are working right at the top of their professional game every Sunday. I really hope you find the podcast useful. If you do, please reach out to me on Twitter @SteveWestgarth, or search Steve Westgarth on LinkedIn. I'm also actively looking for people who would like to contribute to the podcast. If you have something interesting to say, please don't hesitate to reach out. My name is Steve Westgarth, and this is The Engineering Leader. Let me tell you a secret. You also write bad code. If you disagree, you may as well switch off.